China announced Friday that it will raise tariffs on U.S. goods from 84% to 125%. It's the latest salvo in an escalating trade war between the world's two largest economies that has rattled markets and raised fears of a global slowdown. Joining us now, Isaac Stonefish, Strategy Risks founder and CEO. Isaac, it's been a little while since we've talked, certainly since this back and forth really heated up here. And as someone who is a close student of this relationship between the U.S. and China, is it impossible to predict what happens next? What are some of your best guesses as to how things develop from here?
With the caveat that these have to be guesses, I do think the recent... We are basically at the bottom of where I think things are going to go in the near term. I do think the relation is going to devolve in months, years. I think this is just a taste of what's to come, but I do feel like with this roller coaster, we're going to go down perhaps a little bit more, and then relations will improve. China will come to the negotiating table. The two sides will potentially strike some sort of deal. And then 6 months, a year, 2 years later, things will be far, far worse.
Isaac, I wonder, what do you think the risks are that Beijing starts to really go after American companies, Isaac, that do a lot of business in China? And what could that look like?
So for folks who are in the trenches there, they know that Beijing has been making it a very inhospitable place to do business for years, if not longer. And I do think you're right. I do think things could get quite worse. I think what they could see are tax irregularities, permitting problems, harassment, arrest, torture of workers. And I do want to point out for American companies, their Chinese staff are far more vulnerable. And so when Beijing targets individuals working at American companies in China, usually it's the Chinese employees who bear the brunt of it.
And Isaac, so you're an American CEO, you're hearing this right now, you're listening to this. What do you do, Isaac?
So what you do is threefold. You better price your China risk, which means looking at all of your partnerships with Chinese entities, your supply chain, your joint ventures. You make sure that you're taking care of your staff and you put safety first and you do not put your Chinese staff in the line of fire. And you come up with a plan for what happens if the US and China stop just fighting a trade war and have an actual war. What do you do in that case to make sure that you are protected and that your business can go on, not as usual because things would be radically different, but that you have a plan in place.
Now, Isaac, we've talked about that potential for an actual war in the past. Where are we on that sort of likelihood continuum at this point of the trade war?
I think, and again, so difficult to predict, I think this is not going to be the last straw, or as the Chinese say, the spark that causes the prairie fire. I think there's going to be a deal. The markets will have a very false lull, and then something else will spark a conflict or a war in months or more likely several years. So again, caveat, prediction, but that's what I think right now.
Isaac, what are the chances you think that Beijing takes advantage of, listen, all this drama, all this volatility, and does invade Taiwan? I'm curious what odds you would put on that. And if they did, Isaac, what you think the American response would be?
I think what we're going to see much more likely is a push. And Beijing loves sending out these sonar pings, sending out signals to see the level of resolve. So I think what we're going to see is cyber attack against Taiwan, or additional types of blockades, more military presence over Taiwan, and then see how Taiwan responds, see how the United States responds, and also see how Japan responds. We often forget how close Japan is to Taiwan and how much a Chinese-owned Taiwan would threaten Japan. So if China does that and there's very little pushback from the rest of the world, then I do think the chances are good of an invasion in the near term. I think if the US and Japan and Taiwan do push back, then I assume Beijing backs down for now.
And Isaac, we've been hearing some interesting anecdotal evidence of the fallout, sort of the initial fallout here. One of the stories we saw today, Bloomberg reporting that Five Below, the discount retailer, has, through its shipping company, asked to pause some of its vendor shipments from China. Do you expect us to see much more of that? And then, even though China has said it's not going to raise the tariffs of stuff coming into China anymore? Are there other measures that you expect?
When you talk to companies that source from China, they talk about the price being attractive, but they also talk about the predictability and the volume. The idea that, oh, I can really make these very large orders coming from China. And what we're seeing, and this is really a feature of the trade war, not a bug, we're seeing increased unpredictability. And so I think a lot of other retailers are going to follow suit. The real question for us in this space is how transparent are they going to be about it? Are they going to make announcements? Is the reporting going to come out like it did with Five Below that they are really reducing their China supply chain exposure? Or is that something we're going to have to find out and sort of guess at based on other reported information?
Isaac, I'm curious though, Xi Jinping finds himself in this position where his economy, Isaac, has been sputtering, right? You can argue it was just starting to try and find its footing, and now he finds himself in this fight with Trump and the U.S. How secure is his position?
The trillion-dollar question, it's really difficult to know. And there's been some credible reports of a very serious purge at the top of the Chinese military, which should remember is not an independent military, but an arm of the Communist Party. And that could either be a really important sign of insecurity or a sign of his ability to exert more control and influence. But I do think your question is the most important issue. How secure is his control and power? People will often say, oh, China craves stability. No, it's that Beijing and Xi Jinping craves control. And so any indications on that are very, very important signals for investors.
And so, Isaac, just to wrap up here, what is sort of the one big piece of advice that you're giving to clients right now when it comes to this relationship?
Twofold, if I can cheat on the question. One
Yes.
is deep breath. These are stressful times, and you will get through it. Don't say, oh, I'm going to put my head under the desk at things like this. But the second is really better price your China risk. Understand that this relationship is likely to unravel, and make sure that you have a plan in place, you have alternative suppliers, and that you have a really good understanding of what your China footprint is so that you can move quickly and take advantage of opportunities as they do open up.
Isaac, always great to have you on the show. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.